Nope.
Hello, dear listener. Summer is quickly wrapping up and fall is approaching. And to some people, that's actually the best time to camp. I'm not one of those people. To me, camping season is pretty much over. But before it's completely dead, I figured I'd share 3 more creepy camping stories with you. If you enjoy this video, be sure to check out the other one I did. I'll leave a link at the end of this one. And remember to like and subscribe for future videos. Now, with all that said, grab your folding chair, gather around the fire, grab some marshmallows, and let's begin. Number 1. My brother, his friend, and I went camping about a year ago. Our parents left us home alone, so we figured we'd be able to head out and return before they arrived back home. It was a beautiful, sunny day. We set up our camp and stayed there until dark. We brought our family's 4-wheeler and took turns driving it around. When it was my brother's turn, his friend and I started talking about aliens and other creepy stuff. When my brother got back, we sat down and talked for 4 or 5 hours. When it was really late into the night, we began to hear footsteps around our site. Scared shitless from the random and unexpected noise, we all looked outside our giant tent. At the bottom of the hill that our site sat upon was the figure of a tall man. There was a full moon, so we could see that this guy was at least 6.5 feet tall. We couldn't make out his face. Freaked out, we huddled back in our tent, looking at each other, hoping that someone would suggest what to do. When my brother peeked out again, he told us the man was gone. At this point, we were ready to nope the hell out of there. We quickly packed everything we had and drove out, heading back home. My brother's friend crashed with us that night since it was so late and he didn't want to worry his parents by returning at such an odd time. We all fell asleep in the basement. At around 3 a.m., I awoke to a strange noise. From the basement, you were able to see through the windows into the backyard from a low vantage point. I climbed up on the couch under one of the windows and slowly peered outside. Part of me knew what I would see, but I didn't want to believe it. It was the same man. Well, at least I assumed it was. What are the chances of 2 extremely tall men stalking us in one night? I freaked out, screaming at the top of my lungs to my brother. I told him what I saw, which caused him and his friend to run into the backyard, equipped with baseball bats. In hindsight, that was probably a pretty stupid move on their part. They looked around the yard, but nothing was there. The yard was fairly large, and to this day, I don't see how the man could have vanished that quickly. We decided not to call the police, since we were afraid we would end up getting in some sort of trouble once the whole story was spelled out. Plus, the man didn't do much other than trespass in our yard. Fortunately, we haven't had another encounter with that man since that night. We haven't told our parents either, and we definitely won't be getting in touch with nature anytime soon. Number 2. Told from a female perspective. For some reason, I am always attracting weirdos. I am really cute, or so I've been told, and very nice to people. And I'm also awkward in an adorable type of way. Unfortunately, despite all those qualities, the crazies are always drawn to me. This story is not so much scary as it is creepy. I just want people to be aware of their surroundings and be careful when judging a book by its cover. Actually, my day started off normal enough. My normal weekend routine went according to plan. Only this day, I met a seemingly nice guy who really seemed to have everything going for himself. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was jogging in the park near my neighborhood. As I came around the bend of the street that neared my house, there he stood, this gorgeous man. He looked like he stepped out of a GQ magazine, nice suit and tie, dressed to the nines. He smiled at me and said hello, and then proceeded to tell me how cute I was, and asked for my number. Honestly, I was shocked that such a hot guy would be interested in me. I was in my yoga tank and shorts, hair tied back, no makeup, sweaty from the jog, etc. But no alarm bells went off. Yet. Anyway, I obliged and gave him my number, and he gave me his, and then I went on my way. Within a few seconds of getting into my door, my phone went off. It was him sending me a text message. I did find it odd that he was texting me so quickly, but I brushed it off as nerves and sent back some emojis. I thought nothing else of it for the rest of the day. I actually turned my cell phone off and proceeded to take a nap. This is when another alarm should have gone off in my head, but I let it slide again. When I turned on my cell phone after waking up, there were countless texts, missed calls, and voice messages from this guy. They were all asking why I was ignoring him. I found this very strange, to be hounding someone you just met a few hours earlier, as if the two of you are already in a relationship. So I called him and told him if he didn't chill out, he would need to lose my number. He apologized and said it would never happen again, and then proceeded to ask me out on a date. I accepted, thinking what harm could come out of dinner and getting to know each other. Fast forward to date night. I find out a lot about him, like his prestigious educational background and his family's social standing. Let's just say they are a very prominent group of people. I was intrigued, and everything seemed to be going fine. That is, until he started mumbling to himself. At first, I thought it was just me overthinking things, but when he started to answer his own questions, I got freaked out. While he continued to mumble to himself, I interjected. "Hey, is there anything you'd like to talk about?" He replied firmly, "No." Well, at this moment, I knew this would be our first and last date. I suddenly understood why this handsome man from a well-to-do family was still single. It was clear that he has some real mental issues that needed to be addressed by a mental health care professional. It was also clear to me that I would not be seeing him again for any more dates. And for some reason that I can't really pinpoint now, it was also clear to him. So we ate our dinner, and the rest of the date went on in complete silence until we went our separate ways. I thought that would be the end of it. A couple of weeks went by, and I was relieved that he hadn't contacted me, and I was thinking it was very obvious that the first date was horrible and unnerving. I wouldn't say I was ghosting the guy, but there was really nothing further to discuss at this point. There would be no more interaction between the two of us. Or so I thought. I was wrong. A couple of Saturdays later, I was on my usual jog path, and guess who else was there at the same time, in workout gear, smiling from ear to ear, running towards me. Nothing other than Prince Charming himself. I was mortified. "Hey, you," he exclaimed in excitement. "Oh, hi, how are you?" I answered uneasily. He replied, "Okay, just thinking about you and our future together." I was at a loss for words at this point. It dawned on me that if I didn't make my point clear right then and there that I was not interested, this would continue to go on, because he was clearly not catching the hint. I told him, "Look, you're a nice guy, but I don't think you're the guy for me. I wish you the best in life. Good luck." Well, he said he understood and kept on his run as I proceeded to head home. I truly thought that would be the end of it, but after another week passed, he began sending me texts again. In these messages, he would beg and plead for another date because he knew I was, quote, the one, and how his family wanted him to settle down and get married soon. He told me he would surely die without me. The whole thing left me feeling very overwhelmed, so I didn't answer. Instead, I chose to simply block his number. The next week, my family went on our annual camping trip. And this is where shit got real. He starts to call me from several random numbers, saying he knows exactly where I am. He even told me he was watching me. Initially, I shrugged it off as a lie, but when he told me what state my family and I were camping in, I freaked the hell out because I had not told him any of this. If you've ever been camping, especially in the middle of the woods, you know how unnerving the sounds of the forest could be. The pitch blackness of night brings even more terror, as every snap of a twig could be a threat. Needless to say, I didn't sleep much that night. I didn't hear from him for the rest of the camping trip, but when I got back home, the calls continued. He proceeded to tell me how anything could happen to my family and me because of how powerful and connected his family was. He told me they knew how to make people disappear. I told him to screw off and to leave me alone, but to no avail, as the harassment continued off and on for another month. During that time, whenever I would leave the house to go to work, run errands, or just get out for a bit, I would notice his car parked across the street from my house, watching me. I never told this guy where I lived, and we'd only been on one date, for God's sake. I was in a lot of distress, barely sleeping, because every little sound I would hear in the night would make me think it was him trying to break into my house. I tried to remain vigilant and undaunted in his presence because I didn't want him to think I was afraid of him and his antics. It was hard though, because somehow he knew everything about me, even things we had never discussed. He continued to threaten me with bodily harm if he didn't get his way. I stayed steadfast, but finally decided to tell my best friend, who was in the military and works in law enforcement, about the ordeal. I was mainly asking to get some insight on my legal options and to see if they could help in any way. My friend only had to hear the story once before he asked for the man's name. I only remembered his first name at that point, so he traced him by his phone number. Many of his numbers that he called from were registered either under his name or under the name of his close family members. Now, I don't know what my best friend said or did, but everything that was happening stopped abruptly. The phone calls, the messages, the threats, the stalking, they all just stopped. I am so grateful he didn't follow through with the threats to harm me. And I'm even more grateful for a best friend who can scare some sense into anybody who might try to do that again. I definitely learned my lesson from all of this. Just because someone is drop dead gorgeous doesn't mean that they can't be batshit crazy. Number 3. I used to live in Japan, but recently moved to a town somewhere in America. In our town, there was a story going around that a cult had a cabin somewhere in the woods near our town, and that they were doing incantations, summoning spirits and specters, and all the other usual paranormal stuff you hear about. My friend Jack and I, who I met when I first moved into town, didn't really believe in the paranormal, so when we had an opportunity to do so, we would every so often camp near the section of where the cabin was rumored to be and search around for it. It didn't take very long, since on our 5th time camping, we found where it was. The cabin was completely hideous. It was infested with cockroaches, spiders, and even some centipedes. The left side of the cabin was decayed slightly. The right side had a bit of a termite problem. At first, it looked like any other run-down cabin. Then we took a second, much closer look. That was when a horrid stench hit us. It was really bad. I gagged and almost vomited. Even though we were busy dealing with the smell, Jack was able to get a good look at the walls. They were covered with weird symbols, upside-down crosses, blood-red eyes, and what appeared to be human body parts, stripped of the skin and nailed to the wall. I wanted to call the police, or at least run away as far as possible. Jack, however, insisted on going deeper into the cabin. He persisted. "I'm not believing any of this. These are probably just really good decorations." As reluctant as I was, I pushed onward, Jack leading with his flashlight. We opened a door slowly. That's when I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out and vomited onto the grass. The reason I vomited was even worse than the stench. Right after opening that door, we found a dead dog. It had been butchered and left to rot. Worse than that was, it was a local dog that had went missing 2 days before. Jack gently pushed the dog to the side so he could get even further. He waited a bit for me, and we kept going. This newer part of the cabin was pretty much like the rest, except instead of hanging body parts, there were blood-red ruins. We came into the main living room of the cabin. It had a big ritual circle. The walls were again different, this time now sporting words such as devil, the beast, our master, the end, and other terrifying phrases. Just like the runes and the eyes, they were all blood red, except this time it seemed like it was written with real blood. That was when I figured out the other drawings were simply dried, and it didn't look as clear as these. The more I figured it out, the worse I felt. If the others were dried, that would mean these were just made. That was when I had it. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to the cabin door, and what I saw at that point, I could never unsee. A tall, slender figure, covered in blood and what I assumed to be body parts of something, was standing, blocking the cabin door. I screamed as loud as I could. I turned back to look at Jack. Though he still looked like Jack, the man I looked at now was carrying a knife. He had a grin on his face that seemed to be widening with every second. I backed away from him, but he grabbed my arm and dragged me closer. I struggled, trying to get away, but his grip was locked firmly. I watched in horror as he raised the knife above his head. That was when I made a last-ditch effort. I kicked him in the forbidden zone, which worked like a charm. I ran toward the direction of the door. That was when I bumped into the slender figure again. Now I could make out his face. I know this sounds crazy, but what I saw was not human. It looked like the face out of something from hell. I shambled back a bit, but then I remembered Jack was still there. I moved to the right and found a window. The only window in the entire cabin. I tried and tried to open it, but it simply didn't budge. I turned back in shock as I realized that this was how I was going to die. I was going to be murdered in some satanic cabin by someone I thought was my friend. I crouched down, now in tears, and closed my eyes. I waited for the knife to end it all. I waited, but eventually I realized nothing was happening. So I slowly and carefully opened my eyes and saw that it was daytime. Jack, or possessed Jack, had collapsed on the floor, still clenching the knife. The slender figure was gone. I tried at the window again, and now that it was daytime, I saw that it was locked. I unlocked it and opened it up. How silly, I thought, that I didn't think to check for the locks the first time. I made a mental note to always do that, and then proceeded to exit out of the window, carrying Jack through it. I ran back to our campsite and put Jack in his tent. I recapped on what happened that night, and then put it in my diary. Though this wasn't the nearest near-death experience I have ever had, it was definitely the most horrifying and grotesque. I waited for Jack to wake up. When he did, he didn't bring up anything from the night prior. It seemed like the whole thing was completely out of his memory. He didn't even remember going deep into the cabin itself. I never told anyone what happened, not even Jack. Fast forward to today. Not only are Jack and I still friends, but I would say he's the best friend I've ever had. And I never want him to know that he came close to murdering me.